To episode 31 of Dark Academia Queen. Today we're going to be continuing with our Mary Shelley episodes. She is known for Frankenstein, and we covered a lot in the first episode. So this episode, I plan to cover a lot more of her. So hopefully, what do you think of Mary Shelley so far? But oh my gosh, that seemed like a messy relationship to begin with her husband. But she's one of the most known authors in the world. That's the thing. But if you're new here, hit that like button. Please ring that bell for notifications and subscribe, guys. Please help a girl out. I also have a merch shop that you can go and check out. It's called Breezyville Merch Shop for all your merchandise. Um, I also have three sister podcasts. Well, now four actually. Now that I think about it, one is called Down a Rabbit Hole. That's a newer one. I just started that one. I'm excited for that one. Because there's a lot of things like I want to cover on this one that don't really resonate with Dark Academia. At the same time, I love going down the rabbit hole of different events, people, urban legends, and myths. I also have Sassy Southern Belle, just a breezy chat, and True Crime Lounge. I don't think I need to go into detail what True Crime Lounge is. Do y'all? No. But anyway, let's get started. Let's go back, shall we? So, one of the party's first tasks of arriving in Italy was to hand Alba over to Byron, who was living in Venice. He had agreed to raise her as long as Claire had nothing more to do with her. And the Shelleys then embarked on a roving experience, never settling in one place for long, and along the way they accumulated a circle of friends and acquaintances who often moved with them, and the couple devoted their time to writing, reading, learning, sightseeing, and socializing. The Italian adventure was, however, blighted for Mary Shelley by the deaths of both her children, Clara, in September 1818 in Venice, and William in June 1819 in Rome. These losses left her in a deep depression and isolated her from Percy. Now, for a time, Mary Shelley found comfort only in her writing. The birth of her fourth child, Percy Florence, on November 12, 1819, finally lifted her spirits. And though she nursed this memory of her lost children till the end of her life, and Italy provided the Shelleys, Byron, and other exiles with political freedom to unattainable at home. And despite the associations with the personal loss, Italy became um, Mary Shelley's A Country Which Memories Painted a Paradise. And the Italian years were a time with intense intellectual and creative activity for both the Shelleys. And Raoul Percy composed a series of major poems. Mary wrote the novel Matilda, the historical Valperga, and the plays Persephone and Midas. No, Proserpine and Midas, sorry y'all. And she also wrote Valperga to help alleviate her father's financial difficulties as Percy refused to assist him. Now, she was often ill, however, prone to depressions, and she was also had to cope with Percy's interest in other women, such as Sophia Stacey, Avelia Vivimani, and Jane Williams. And since Mary Shelley shared her belief in non-exclusivity of marriage, she formed emotional ties with her own among the men and women in her circle. She was particularly fond of Greek revolutionary Prince Alexandros Morakandos, and Jane and Edward Williams. Now, in December 1818, the Shelleys would travel with Claire and their servants in Naples while they stayed for 3 months, receiving only one visitor, a physician. In 1820, they found themselves plagued with the accusation and threat from Paulo and Elise Foggy, um, former servants of Percy Shelley, who had been dismissed in Naples shortly after the Foggys had married. Now, the pair revealed on February 27, 1819, in Naples, that Percy Shelley had registered his child as Mary Shelley's as a 2-month-old baby girl named Alina Adelaide Shelley. And the Foggys also claimed that Claire Claremont was the baby's mom. And biographers have offered various interpretations of these events. One was that Percy decided to adopt a local child, and that the child was his by Elise, Claire, or an unknown woman. That or that at least this was Byron's. And Mary Shelley insisted that she would have known if Claire had been pregnant, but it was unclear how much she really knew. In the events of Naples, a city Mary Shelley later called paradise, inhabited by the devils, remains shrouded in mystery. The only certainty is that she herself was not the child's mom. But Elaine Adelaide Shelley would die in Naples June 9th, 1820. Now, after leaving Naples, the Shelleys settled in Rome. And the city where her husband wrote the meanest streets were strewed with her truncated columns, broken capitals, and sparkling fragments of granite and porphyra, and the voice of the dead and still vibrations is breathed from these dumb things, animated and glorified as they were by men. And Rome inspired her to begin writing her unfinished novels, Valerius and the reanimated Roman, and where the infamous hero reveals the decay of Rome and the machination of the superstitious Catholics. Now, mm, the writing of her novel was broken off when her son William died of malaria. Shelley bitterly commented that she had been in Italy to improve her husband's health, and instead the Italian climate had just killed her two children, leading her to write, "May you, dear Maramites, never know what it is to lose two only and lovely children in a year, to watch their dying moments and that it be left childless and forever miserable." To deal with this grief, she wrote a novella, The Fields of Fancy, which became Matilda, and it's dealing with a young woman whose beauty inspired incestuous love in her father, who ultimately commits suicide to stop himself from acting on his passions for his daughter. Sounds like a V.C. Andrew books. Not gonna lie. Maybe this is where she got it from. Maybe. But while she spends the rest of her life full of despair, um, about the unnatural love that I had inspired, and the novella offered a feminist critique on the patriarchal society. As Matilda is punished as in the afterlife, though she did nothing to encourage her father's feelings. That's sad though. It's like a lot of it is victim blaming, and that's the sad truth right there. Um, but in the summer of 1822, a pregnant Mary moved with Percy, Claire, and Edward, and Jane and Williams in the isolated Villa Magni at the sea edge near the hamlet of San Teresa in the Bay of Lucery. Once they settled in, Percy broke the evil news to Claire that her daughter Allegra had died of typhus in a convent in Bagnacavallo. Now, Mary Shelley was distracted and unhappy in the cramped and remote villa, which she came to regard as a dungeon. And on June 16th, she miscarried, losing as much blood as that she nearly died. She rather than wait for a doctor, Percy sat her in a bath, eyes and stopped the bleeding. And the active doctor later told him saved her life. All was not well between the couple that summer, however, and Percy spent more time with Jane Williams than with his depressed and his wife. And much of his poetry Shelley wrote at San Teresa involved Jane rather than Mary. Now, the post offered Percy and Edward the chance to enjoy the perfect plaything for the summer, a new sailing boat. And the boat was designed by Daniel Roberts, an admirer of Byron, Edward Trunley, and who had joined the party in January 1822. On July 1st, 1822, Percy Shelley, Edward Williams, and Captain Daniel Roberts sailed down the coast of Livorno, and it was there Percy discussed with Byron and Leigh Hunt the launch of a radical magazine called The Liberal. And on July 8th, he and William have set out to return to the journey to Lauricy with their 18-year-old boat boy, Charles Vivian. They never reached their destination. Now, a letter arrived at the Villa Magni from Hunt to Percy Shelley, dated July 8th, saying, "Pray write to tell us how you get home. But they say bad weather, after all, say Monday and we can be anxious." She and Jane Williams rushed desperately to Livorno and then to Pisa in the fading hope their husbands were still alive. 10 days later, three bodies washed up near the coast of Reggio, midway between Livorno and Larisi. It was Tyranny, Byron, and Hunt who cremated Percy Shelley's corpse on the beach of Varese. Oh. Now, this is when she would return to England, and after her husband's death, Mary lived a year with Leigh Hunt and his family in Genoa, where she often saw Byron transcribed his poems. She resolved to live by pen and for her son, but her financial situation was precarious. On July 23rd, 1823, she left Genoa for England, and stayed with her father and stepmother in Strand until a small advance from her father-in-law enabled her to lodge nearby. Sir Timothy Shelley had first agreed to support his grandson Percy Florence only if he were to hand over an appointed guardian. She rejected this idea instantly. She managed instead to wring out Sir Timothy a limited annual allowance, which she would repay when Percy inherited the estate. But to the end of her days, he refused to meet her in person and deal with her only through lawyers. Mary Shelley busied herself with editing her husband's poems, among the other literary endeavors. But concern for her son restricted her options. Sir Timothy threatened to stop her allowance if any biography of the poet were published. In 1826, Percy Florence became the legal heir of the Shelley estate after the death of his half-brother Charles Shelley. Now, the Father's Son by Harriet Shelley. And now Sir Timothy raised Mary's allowance to £100 a year to £250 a year, but remained as difficult as ever. Now, she enjoyed a very stimulating society of William Godwin's circle, but poverty preventing her from socializing as she wished. She also felt ostracized for those who still disapproved of her relationship with Percy. In the summer of 1824, Mary moved to Kentish Town in North London to be near Jane Williams. She may have been, in the words of a biographer, in love with Jane, and Jane was a little disillusioned by the gossiping that Percy had prepared her to marry, owing that Mary's inadequacy as a wife. At the time, Mary was working on her novel, The Last Man, and she assisted in a series of friends who were writing and memoirs and working of Byron and Percy Shelley. The beginnings of her attempts began to immortalize her husband, but she also met the American actor John Howard Payne and the American writer Washington Irving, who intrigued her. Payne fell in love with her in 1826, asked to marry him. She refused, saying that she had, after being married to one genius, she could not marry another, and Payne accepted his rejection and tried without success to talk to his friend Irving into proposing himself. And Mary was aware of Payne's plan, but how seriously how serious it was unclear. In 1827, she was party to a scheme that enabled her friend Isabel Robinson and Isabel's lover, Mary Diana Dodds, to write under the name David Lindsay, to embark on a life together in France as husband and wife. Now, with the help of Payne, whom she kept in the dark on the details, Mary Shelley obtained false passports for the couple. In 1828, she fell ill with smallpox while visiting them in Paris. Weeks after she recovered, unscarred but without her youthful beauty. It now in during this period in 1827 to 40, she was very busy in editor as editor and writer. She wrote novels, The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck, Faulkner, um, and contributed volumes of Lives of Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and French authors to Dionysius Lauder Cabinet Cyclopedia. And she also wrote stories of the late for ladies magazines. She was still helping to support her father and looked for the publishers to help each other. In 1830, she sold the copyright for a new edition of Frankenstein for £60 to Henry Colburn, Richard Bentley for their standard novel series. After her father's death in 1836 at the age of 8, she began assembling his letters and memoirs in publication, as he had requested in his will. But after 2 years of work, she abandoned the project. And throughout this period, she championed Percy Shelley's poetry, promoting his publication and quoting it in her writing. By 1837, Percy's work was well known and increasingly admired. In the summer of 1838, Edward Moon, the publisher of Tennyson and Son-in-law Charles Lamb, proposed writing an edition of the collected works of Percy Shelley. Mary wanted to include the collection in an expurgative version of Percy Shelley's expert poem Green Map. Now Moxon wanted to leave out the most radical passage as as too shocking and aesthetical, but Mary prevailed, thanks to Harriet D. Bonville, who agreed to Mary's request to borrow her own original copy gifted to Percy Shelley, and Mary was paid £500 to edit the work, and which Sir Timothy insisted she should not include a biography. Mary was found a way to tell the story of Percy's life nonetheless. She included extensive biographical notes and shared the poems. Now, she continued to practice her mom's feminist principles by extending aid to women whom society disapproved. For instance, she extended financial aid to Mary Diana Dawes, a single mom and illegitimate herself who appeared to be having a lesbian, and gave a new identity of Walter Sholto Douglas, husband of her lover Isabel Robinson. Shelley also insisted Georgina Paul, a woman who disallowed a woman disallowed by her husband for alleged adultery. She also continued to treat potential romantic partners with caution. In 1828, she met and flirted with French writer Prosper Mérimée, but her one surviving letter to him appears to be a deflection of his declaration of love. And she was delighted when her old friend from Italy, Edward Trumley, returned to England and then joked about marriage in their letters. Now, their friendship had altered, however, and following her refusal to cooperate with his proposal and biography of Percy Shelley, he later reacted angrily in omission of the atheistic section of Cream Mab in Percy's poem. Now, oblique references in her journal from 1830s until the 1840s suggest that she has strong feelings for the radical Aubrey Beauclerk, who may have disappointed her by marrying others. So her first concern during the years um, was the welfare of Percy Florence, and she honored her late husband's wish that he attend public school and with Sir Timothy's grudging help, and educated him in Harrow to avoid boarding fees. She moved to Harrow and the Hill himself so that Percy could attend uh, as a day scholar. And though Percy went on to Trinity College, Cambridge, and dabbled in politics and law, he showed no sign of his parents' gifts. So, what was her final years? So, in 1840 and 1842, Mary and her son together traveled on the continent, journeys and Mary Shelley's recorded in rambles in Germany and Italy. In 1844, Sir Timothy Shelley finally died at the age of 90, falling from the stalk like of overblown flowers, as Mary put it. So from the time she and her son were financially independent, through the estate proved less vulnerable than they had hoped. In the mid 1840s, Mary found herself the target of three separate blackmailers. In 1845, an Italian political exile called Gastacci, whom she had met in Paris, threatened to publish her letters she sent to him. A friend of her son's bribed police chief into seizing the papers, including the papers, which were destroyed. Shortly afterwards, Mary bought some letters written by himself and Percy Shelley um, from a from a man called himself G. Byron, posing as the illegitimate son of Lord Byron. Also, in 1845, Percy Shelley's cousin Thomas Meldwin approached her, claiming to have written a damaging biography of him, and he would suppress the issue in return for £250, but she refused. In order to fulfill his wishes, Percy, Florence, and his wife Jane had their coffins of their parents exhumed and buried in Bournemouth. In 1846, Percy Florence married James Gibson at St. John's, and their marriage proved to be a happy one, and Mary Shelley and Jane were fond of each other. Mary lived with her son and daughter-in-law in Field Place, Sussex, in the Shelleys' ancestral home and at Chester Square, London, accompanying them on travel abroad. Mary Shelley's last years were blighted with illness, and from 1839 she suffered from headaches and bouts of paralysis in parts of her body, which would prevent her from reading and writing. And on February 1st, 1851, she would pass. So, on the first anniversary of her death, the Shelleys opened the box desk, and inside they found of logs and of their dead children's hair and the books that she had shared with Percy Shelley. And a copy of the poem Adonis, in which the page unfolded round in thick parcels, containing large amounts of ashes and some remains of his heart. It's kind of sad, but also kind of sweet. I'm like, I don't know how to feel on that one. Like, ugh, I'm a weird person, I know, but still, like, how would you feel on that? Like, carrying around parts of his heart. Okay. But she lived a literary life. Her dad encouraged her to learn to write by composing letters, and her favorite occupation as a child was writing stories. Unfortunately, all of this was lost when she ran away with Percy in 1814, and none of her surviving manuscripts can be definitively dated of that year. Her first published work is often taught to be like seen as Monsieur Naughty Sheepball, which was a comic verses written for Godwin's juvenile library when she was 10 and a half. However, the poem is attributed to the couple's writing for the most recent authoritative collection of works, and Percy Shelley enthusiastically encouraged Mary's writing. Now, with the rise of feminist literature criticism in the 1970s, particularly Frankenstein, began to attract much more attention from scholars. F- Feminists and psychoanalytic critics also largely responsible for recovery of neglect as Shelley's writer. Ellen Morse was one of the first to claim Shelley's loss of a baby, where she was crucially influenced in writing Frankenstein. She argues that the novel of a birth year, where Shelley comes in terms with the guilt causing her mother's daughter, as well as her falling as a parent. Now, Victor's Frankenstein failure as a parent in the novel has been an expression of her anxieties, which accompany pregnancy, giving birth, and particularly maternity as well. Okay, that's it for part two. Part two. Join me in our next episode as we finish up with our Mary Shelley episode series, and then we're gonna talk about the history of steampunk and how it has truly resonated and has become very more popular than we like to think. There's plenty of examples of that.